Okay, I'm not sure how well this video is going to pan out because I've got cats wandering around being silly, and I'm hoping that the tool from my small dispenser will fit this because the box with all the parts for this one is upstairs and I can't go get it right now. But I was just thinning this grind down using a small 6x1 inch Reeve diamond stone that I ordered, which is quite nice. It's a dual side coarse and extra coarse that's probably equivalent to an 80 grit and 100 grit, and it sounds very coarse, and it probably is, but it's actually very nice. It's kind of the minimum you need if you need to, with any speed, get steel off a modern steel. And even then, to be careful and not damage everything, you're going to take some time doing it. You're going to spend half an hour, whereas on a belt grinder I could do it in about 15 seconds. But anyway, I've thinned it down enough now where it should be admirably performant, good enough. Still nowhere near as thin as my own knives and things, but it should be good enough. But the main thing is now I can't close the knife because there's probably all sorts of dust and dirt and grit would have got in here even if you think it hadn't, and that's really not good on a slip joint or any kind of folding knife. So I'm going to pull it apart now and give it a clean. So let's see what I can do. Slightly precarious here. Hopefully the phone won't fall down because it is literally balancing on this paper towel that you can see here, and I don't have a tripod, so I've just put it on maximum wide zoom to be able to see anything. And let's pull an Impinda apart if this Allen key fits. Hopefully that fits. As I said, it's there we go. Goes in there quite deep, and you have to use Loctite on these because of the nature of the design. So you've got to keep one finger on this one to keep it in, and that's a slotted end piece. And this is very tight, which makes me feel like I put too much Loctite on there last time. And let's screw it out. I'm trying to keep it in the camera view, but you're not going to see a huge amount of detail, I expect. And it's an odd design because what you're pulling out is actually the female part that you've unscrewed, leaving the screw in there in the slotted portion. And just checking. Definitely there's not a lot of grease left on there, and that would have been, I didn't put a lot in there in the first place, but I think there was probably just a little bit too much thread locker in there. It might have slipped out. I didn't notice that in the action though. But yeah, so what I was saying was you're holding one portion and you're left in there. It's counterintuitive. That should be the bit you're unscrewing. Anyway, that will just fall out once you're done. Let's go back to wide view. And I'm not going to show everything on video. I mean, when I'm cleaning in things, I'll just pause. But I've put these in. They seem to be in extra tight. There we go. Definitely maybe too much Loctite. I'll take the blade out now that that's out, just for safety. And just making sure that that's actually unscrewing and not just spinning both sides. So I'll pause now and just take this apart. Okay, so that was a little bit fiddly because I had too much Loctite and I needed to get a second tool to go onto the back side so that I could unscrew it, because these ones are not captured. So there's the parts. It's pretty simple. and this is quite interesting. So although they used S35VN for the backspacer, and although I have not really had this near a lot of water or anything very often as far as I know, quite a bit of rust and grime in there, so probably a good thing that I tore this apart. And that water you can see there and everything is probably just from me doing the sharpening, the grease. But yeah, that needs a significant cleanup from the rust in the back here. And that's probably just from the humidity and environment here. So I'm going to go clean that up. Okay, so I'm just getting a little bit of Scotch Brite off a dishcloth, that's all I've got, and some WD-40, and giving this a clean. And what I'm going to do is, before I refit all this together, I'm going to put a light coating of Vaseline on all of that part. And this bit here, I imagine there's also the fact that this is sandblasted, there's a lot of debris on there that's never been cleaned off, and I'm going to Scotch Brite all this down and clean off all the sandblasting debris and impregnate it with a bit of WD-40. So at the moment I'm just cleaning down all the washers and everything, giving all this stuff a little bit of a bath in some WD-40, and then I'm going to soak that in some isopropyl alcohol. I'm just getting all the thread locker and everything off. And there's little bits of debris and rust in there. It's interesting, I wonder if I use the folder and maybe I rinse the folder under a tap, you know, and then air dry it out. So yeah, you know, you can't trust that, because this is a stainless material that it's not going to rust when it's captured in there. Like my Sabenza, the inner holes on this are actually quite scratchy and got burrs on them, so I'm going to sand those down a little bit while I'm at it. When I say sand, I mean deburr. I'm not going to take off any material. So just to show how I'm doing this, I've got a Spyderco medium rod, WD-40, and with extremely light pressure, just rubbing back and forth on this. So we're not trying to remove any material from the washer. We're just cleaning off any micro burrs and scratches on those holes that have come out, so that they run a bit smoother and aren't galling against the blade. Okay, so the WD-40 has taken off most of the contaminants and thread locker, and now this is just some pure isopropyl alcohol just to get off any other residue. That way when I can reapply the thread locker without an issue. WD-40 I suspect might stop thread lock adhering. So after I've done this and cleaned it off again, I'm probably going to reapply a very small amount of grease to all these parts to stop any surface rust occurring again. And of course then there's the transference of the surface rust that came from this. Really not great. You can see the staining and pitting there. So yeah, I don't know if the using S35VN was actually an ideal choice as a spring, just because it was what they used for the blade. Yeah, when I made my friction folders, I used a special spring steel that was highly corrosion resistant, and well, who knows if it's working well or not. No one's complained yet. I guess this is no worse than a carbon steel one, right? That's in a lot of slip joints that you can't pull apart. So at least this is, now you know, just pull it apart every month or two and have a look at it and keep it clean. So I'm going to pause again and continue. Alright, so now I'm just applying the tiny smear of grease in here on each side so that it will stick and not fall out. So an important step before reassembly of a slip joint is mask off the blade, do the greasing here and everything. But it can be fiddly with a lot of pressure putting a blade back in, especially if you're not used to it. You don't want to be cutting yourself on that. So now I've just got to put grease on the pivots and things. I'm just using a piece of plastic, tiny bit of fluorinated grease, and rub that around the pivot. I can't really do it while I'm showing it on the camera, so I just sort of show what I'm doing and then apply the grease to the pivot. And put that aside. And you want a tiny smear of grease around here, just a very, very tiny amount, just to reduce friction. You don't want dust and lint clogging up. So you're talking about imperceptible amounts that you're just going to spread across the whole train there. And it's kind of like, if you can see the grease, there's probably too much grease. But we'll just wipe it on, brush it off. That's got a little bit of grease there. And we don't need to grease here, it's already on the washers. Okay, so fitment. Screw at the back. Some kitty cats making lots of noise. I'm just putting the screws back in. I can't really do it under the camera, it's too far of a stretch. But placing the two screws, we have the stop pin in here. The washer's in the right spot. And then, so I've put grease all over this unit, and we'll fit that into here. And so that's where it's going to get tricky, of course, is now you've got tension, and you've got to get the blade under that tension. And how I'd normally do that is I'd have a small jig to apply a little bit of pressure here and lift the spring. But which side have we got? The pivot goes in. Pivot goes in this side. So I probably applied it all to the wrong side, but I'll just switch it around momentarily. Rotate this until it locks in. Into the D spot. Where's the little cutout? Oh no, sorry, the cutout's on the other piece. I have got it on the right side. So, and that goes. Get the key out. It's a really tight fit on that Allen key. There we go. Okay, so of course the trick to a slip joint is that you need to get the blade in here while keeping pressure. So obviously it's going to be hardest like that. Open won't be too bad, but the least amount of pressure is in the closed position. So that's what we want to do. So I just had to pause to yell at a kitty cat. And so if you try and put it in this position, there's no way to push the spring up. So you're stuck with this, which is the open spot. If I try and get this in close, you can see it. So what you really need to do is you just need to push up here. And this is really something where it's tricky to do with a camera. But I'll see if I've got enough. There's no way I can lift that with my finger because of all the tension here. And so what you need is something that you can use as a jig. like this little screw, and that's it. Just push down on that enough to lift the spring up and pop the blade in, and we're done. That's fitted. Now it's just a case of putting the other side back on, which I'll do now. So last time I did this, I really globbed on the Loctite too much by accident. Wasn't really thinking clearly. So this time, just put the screw on the Allen key, and you're after a capillary action, so you just want to squeeze out a little drop there, and let the screw soak it up to get the drop coming out. I have to do it off the camera, sorry. The bottle is so tiny. It's a bit like super glue, and I think it's blocked and I need to go get a pin. So I went from nothing for it to flowing out real quick, but even that, it's just a little bit too much. But that was just soaking it with a capillary action. I'm just going to spin the screw in my finger to get off the excess. And so now the thread has just got a very, very light coating. And this one's the most important. You don't want to overdo it, because if it overdoes it when you screw it down, it's going to squirt out into your pivot. So I'm just going to put a very tiny smear just on the very, very end of this one. So this is the weirdest bit. Basically, you've got that in, you've got to line this up so that it will go into that non-stopping part, but then you've got to screw it in using the one that's already in there, because that's the one that's got the Allen key in it. And that'll get to the point when you're applying pressure on here as you're spinning, that'll just end up slotting in. And the trick now is, these are very tension based, which is why you need the Loctite. So you want to tighten this down until you can't tighten it anymore, and you don't want to really crank it too hard, because you don't want to be putting stress on the washers and things. But it's at that point now where there's a light tension and can't go any further. And this is where we need to take the gunk off the blade so we can test it. Because what we need to do now is just ease it off, only the smallest amount required, so that this will rotate properly and not have stress. So right now that's completely immobilized. I can't even move the blade. And so what we're going to do is now just a fraction. So you can see there, just ease that off, and I can feel this moving a fraction here. And now the lighter you make that, the easier it'll be to open and close. Less clamping pressure here, but it's a fine balance between blade play. You don't want to loosen it so much that you've got blade play. And that feels like I can so that's fully locked, and I'm just taking it maybe about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Try again. I'm going to check the blade play. No blade play at all. And you want to take it off as much as you can without exhibiting blade play, because what you're doing is you're clamping down on the actual spring. So if these are clamping the spring can't move. And that puts more wear on the blade as well, because you're forcing them to grind instead of the spring moving out of the way. So now the other thing to note is that the Loctite's the only thing holding this in the correct position. If that Loctite's not set and hardened, the spring putting pressure on the blade is putting pressure on the pivot, so that when you rotate the blade, it will want to rotate the pivot and unscrew that. So once you've dialed this in, you need to let this sit for a day and let that Loctite really dry. So I've got blade play now, so that's too much. Okay, so I've just got a very, very slight amount of blade play, which is kind of necessary for this to have the right action. And now just got to work that grease in a little bit. And my hands are slippery and the knife is slippery, so I'm being very careful here. And alright, done. Cleaned, rust taken out. Now I know I need to check this every now and then to make sure there's no rust in it. You can't just wash it down and dry it.